Carl Jung discovered that the same cognitive gifts that make INTJ and INTP personalities intellectual powerhouses also create a hidden psychological shadow that systematically sabotages their romantic relationships, turning their greatest strengths into their most destructive weaknesses when it comes to love. Before we dive into this profound psychological paradox that could finally explain why brilliant minds often struggle the most with intimate relationships, make sure to subscribe to the channel and hit that like button, because what you're about to learn will reveal the hidden forces that have been undermining your romantic connections without you even realizing it. Jung understood something that most people miss about INTJ and INTP personalities. Their extraordinary intellectual abilities come with a psychological price that becomes most apparent in intimate relationships. These types possess what Jung called thinking dominance, which gives them incredible analytical power, but also creates a shadow that can turn love into a battlefield of logic versus emotion. The first shadow element Jung identified in these types is what he called emotional intellectualization. INTJ and INTP personalities have such powerful thinking functions that they unconsciously try to solve emotional problems with logic, analyze feelings instead of experiencing them, and turn intimate moments into intellectual exercises. When their partner expresses emotional needs, these types often respond with solutions rather than empathy, analysis rather than understanding, and logic rather than validation. They might say things like, "That's not logical," or "You're being irrational," when their partner is simply trying to share their emotional experience. This intellectualization of emotions creates a devastating dynamic in relationships because it makes their partners feel unheard, invalidated, and emotionally abandoned. The INTJ or INTP thinks they're being helpful by offering logical solutions, but their partner experiences this as emotional rejection and disconnection. Jung recognized that this pattern stems from these types' unconscious fear of their own emotional world. Because thinking is their dominant function, emotions feel chaotic, unpredictable, and threatening to their sense of control and competence. So they unconsciously try to transform emotions into thoughts, which they can then manage and control. The second shadow element is what Jung called intimacy avoidance through complexity. INTJ and INTP personalities are naturally drawn to complex ideas, abstract concepts, and theoretical frameworks. But in relationships, this tendency can become a defense mechanism that prevents true emotional intimacy. These types might spend hours discussing philosophy, analyzing movies, or debating theoretical concepts with their partners, but struggle to have simple, direct conversations about their feelings, needs, or relationship concerns. They use intellectual complexity as a way to avoid the vulnerable simplicity of emotional connection. When their partner tries to have a straightforward conversation about relationship issues, these types might unconsciously complicate the discussion by bringing in abstract concepts, theoretical frameworks, or philosophical perspectives that derail the emotional core of the conversation. Jung understood that this complexity addiction serves a protective function. Complex ideas feel safe and manageable to these types, while simple emotional truths feel exposed and vulnerable. But this pattern creates distance in relationships because their partners feel like they can never reach the real person beneath all the intellectual complexity. The third shadow element Jung identified is emotional superiority complex. Because INTJ and INTP personalities excel at logical thinking, they often unconsciously develop a sense of superiority over what they perceive as emotional irrationality in others. They might view their partner's emotional responses as primitive, illogical, or immature compared to their own rational approach to life. This creates a subtle but devastating dynamic where they position themselves as the rational, mature partner dealing with an emotional, irrational partner. This emotional superiority complex manifests in subtle ways: eye-rolling when their partner gets emotional, dismissive comments about drama, or a patronizing tone when discussing emotional issues. They might say things like, "I don't understand why you're getting so upset about this," or "You're overreacting." Jung recognized that this superiority complex is actually a defense against these types' own emotional insecurity. Because they struggle with their own emotions, they unconsciously devalue emotions in general as a way to protect their self-image as competent and in control. The fourth shadow element is what Jung called control through withdrawal. When INTJ and INTP personalities feel overwhelmed by emotional demands or relationship conflicts, their natural response is to withdraw into their inner world of thoughts and ideas. This withdrawal serves multiple shadow functions. It allows them to regain a sense of control. It punishes their partner for making emotional demands, and it avoids the vulnerability required for emotional resolution. But this pattern is devastating for relationships because it leaves their partner feeling abandoned and rejected during the moments when connection is most needed. The withdrawal often happens at the worst possible times, right when their partner is trying to work through relationship issues or seeking emotional support. The INTJ or INTP disappears into their head, becomes unavailable and distant, and their partner is left feeling like they're in a relationship with a ghost. Jung understood that this withdrawal pattern stems from these types' inferior feeling function. When emotions become too intense or complex, they simply don't have the psychological tools to navigate the situation, so they retreat to the safety of their thinking function. The fifth shadow element Jung identified is perfectionism in love. INTJ and INTP personalities apply the same high standards and perfectionist tendencies to their relationships that they apply to their intellectual pursuits. But love doesn't operate according to logical principles or perfectionist standards. These types might have unconscious checklists for what a perfect relationship should look like, how their partner should behave, or how conflicts should be resolved. When reality doesn't match their idealized vision, they become critical, disappointed, and emotionally distant. They might criticize their partner for not communicating correctly, not resolving conflicts efficiently, or not meeting their intellectual standards. This perfectionism creates a dynamic where their partner feels like they're constantly being evaluated and found lacking. Jung recognized that this perfectionism in love is actually a way of avoiding the messy, imperfect, unpredictable reality of human emotion and connection. These types are comfortable with perfection in ideas, but struggle with the beautiful imperfection of real human relationships. The sixth shadow element is what Jung called emotional labor avoidance. INTJ and INTP personalities often unconsciously expect their partners to handle all the emotional work in the relationship, while they focus on what they consider more important intellectual or practical matters. They might leave their partner to manage social relationships, handle emotional conflicts, deal with family dynamics, and maintain the emotional climate of the relationship. They see these tasks as less important or less suited to their abilities, not recognizing that emotional labor is crucial for relationship health. This creates an unfair dynamic where their partner becomes responsible for both their own emotional needs and the emotional needs of the relationship, while the INTJ or INTP remains focused on their intellectual interests and projects. Jung understood that this avoidance stems from these types' unconscious belief that emotional work is somehow beneath their intellectual capabilities or less valuable than their thinking-based contributions to the relationship. The seventh shadow element Jung identified is future projection over present connection. INTJ and INTP personalities are naturally future-oriented, always thinking about possibilities, potential developments, and long-term implications. But this future focus can prevent them from being present with their partner in the moment. They might be physically present but mentally absent, thinking about future projects, analyzing potential problems, or planning long-term strategies. Their partner feels like they're competing with an invisible future for their attention and presence. During intimate moments, these types might be analyzing the relationship's long-term potential rather than experiencing the present connection. During conflicts, they might be strategizing future solutions rather than addressing current emotional needs. Jung recognized that this future projection is often a way of avoiding the vulnerability and uncertainty of present-moment emotional connection. The future feels controllable and manageable in ways that present emotions do not. The eighth shadow element Jung identified is what he called empathy deficit through over-analysis. While INTJ and INTP personalities can understand emotions intellectually, they often struggle with intuitive empathy, the ability to feel what their partner is feeling without analyzing it first. When their partner is upset, these types might spend so much time trying to understand why they're upset, what caused it, and how to fix it, that they completely miss the opportunity to simply be present with their partner's emotional experience. They might ask detailed questions about the emotional situation, analyze the logical components of the problem, and offer rational solutions, all while their partner is simply seeking emotional validation and understanding. This analytical approach to empathy often makes their partner feel more alone and misunderstood. Jung understood that this empathy deficit isn't due to lack of caring, but rather to these types' unconscious belief that understanding emotions intellectually is the same as experiencing empathy emotionally. They confuse analysis with connection, comprehension with compassion. The ninth shadow element is emotional expression phobia. As INTJ and INTP personalities often have deep, complex emotional lives, but they struggle with expressing these emotions in ways that their partners can understand and connect with. They might feel intense love, passion, or concern for their partner, but express it through actions, gifts, or intellectual discussions rather than direct emotional communication. They might say, "I've been thinking about you," instead of "I miss you," or "I analyzed our relationship and determined it's optimal," instead of "I love you." This emotional expression phobia creates a dynamic where their partner never feels truly seen or emotionally connected, even though the INTJ or INTP might be feeling deeply. The emotions are there, but they're trapped behind intellectual barriers that prevent authentic expression. Jung recognized that this phobia stems from these types' fear of emotional vulnerability and their unconscious belief that direct emotional expression is somehow primitive or unsophisticated compared to intellectual communication. The 10th shadow element Jung identified is conflict intellectualization. When relationship conflicts arise, INTJ and INTP personalities automatically shift into analytical mode, trying to solve the problem logically rather than addressing the emotional components of the conflict. They might create frameworks for understanding the conflict, analyze the logical validity of each person's position, and propose rational solutions that completely miss the emotional heart of the issue. They turn relationship conflicts into intellectual debates, rather than opportunities for emotional understanding and connection. This intellectualization of conflict often escalates the very problems they're trying to solve, because their partner feels like their emotions are being dismissed or invalidated. What started as a simple emotional need becomes a complex intellectual argument that leaves both people feeling frustrated and disconnected. Jung understood that this pattern stems from these types' unconscious belief that logic can solve all problems, including emotional ones. They don't recognize that some conflicts require emotional resolution rather than logical solutions. The 11th shadow element is independence as emotional defense. INTJ and INTP personalities highly value their independence and autonomy, but in relationships, this can become a defense mechanism that prevents true interdependence and emotional intimacy. They might resist their partner's attempts to create shared experiences, mutual dependencies, or emotional bonds, because these feel like threats to their autonomy. They want to maintain complete independence even within the relationship, which prevents the natural interdependence that healthy relationships require. This independence defense manifests as resistance to compromise, reluctance to consider their partner's needs in decision-making, and discomfort with the natural vulnerability that comes with emotional dependence on another person. Jung recognized that this independence defense is often a way of avoiding the fear of emotional engulfment or loss of self that these types unconsciously associate with intimate relationships. The 12th shadow element Jung identified is emotional timing dysfunction. INTJ and INTP personalities often struggle with the timing of emotional expression and response. They might need days or weeks to process emotional situations that require immediate response, or they might bring up emotional issues at inappropriate times when their partner isn't ready to engage. They might want to have deep emotional conversations when their partner is tired or stressed, or they might shut down emotionally when their partner most needs their presence and support. This timing dysfunction creates constant emotional mismatches that prevent true intimacy and connection. Jung understood that this timing issue stems from these types' need to process emotions intellectually before they can respond authentically. But relationships require emotional responsiveness in real time, not after extensive analysis and consideration. The 13th shadow element is love as intellectual project. INTJ and INTP personalities often unconsciously approach relationships like intellectual projects to be optimized, analyzed, and perfected, rather than emotional experiences to be lived and felt. They might read relationship books, analyze compatibility theories, and create systems for relationship improvement, all while missing the simple emotional connection that their partner is seeking. They turn love into a problem to be solved rather than an experience to be shared. This intellectual approach to love creates distance because their partner feels like they're being studied rather than loved, analyzed rather than cherished, optimized rather than accepted. Jung recognized that this pattern stems from these types' unconscious belief that intellectual understanding is superior to emotional experience, and that love can be improved through analysis and optimization rather than simply experienced and expressed. But Jung also identified the path to healing these shadow patterns. The key for INTJ and INTP personalities is developing what he called feeling function integration. This doesn't mean becoming emotional or abandoning their thinking strengths, but rather learning to value and develop their emotional intelligence alongside their intellectual abilities. The first step is recognizing that emotions are not problems to be solved, but experiences to be felt and shared. Emotions have their own intelligence and wisdom that cannot be accessed through thinking alone. The second step is learning to be present with emotions, both their own and their partners, without immediately trying to analyze, fix, or understand them intellectually. This requires developing tolerance for emotional ambiguity and uncertainty. The third step is practicing direct emotional expression, learning to say, "I love you," instead of, "I've determined our relationship is optimal," or "I'm scared," instead of, "I've analyzed the potential risks." Not at all. The fourth step is developing empathy through feeling rather than thinking, learning to sense their partner's emotional state without analyzing it, and responding with emotional presence rather than intellectual solutions. Jung believed that when INTJ and INTP personalities integrate their feeling function, they become incredibly powerful in relationships because they combine intellectual depth with emotional wisdom. They can offer both analytical insight and emotional support, both strategic thinking and empathetic understanding. The goal isn't to become less intellectual or to abandon their thinking strengths, but to develop emotional intelligence as a complement to their intellectual abilities. When these types learn to value emotions as much as thoughts, to express feelings as clearly as ideas, and to connect emotionally as deeply as they connect intellectually, they become extraordinary partners. Jung's message to INTJ and INTP personalities is that their intellectual gifts are not obstacles to love, but they become obstacles when they are used as defenses against emotional vulnerability. The same minds that can solve complex problems and understand abstract concepts can also learn to navigate the beautiful complexity of human emotion and intimate connection. The shadow that turns love into chaos can be transformed into a source of depth, wisdom, and authentic connection when these types commit to developing their emotional intelligence alongside their intellectual abilities. If this video has helped you understand how your thinking strengths might be creating relationship challenges, subscribe to the channel and hit that like button. Share in the comments which of these shadow patterns you recognize in yourself, and remember that awareness is the first step toward transformation. Your intellectual gifts are not the problem, but learning to integrate them with emotional wisdom is the key to creating the deep, authentic relationships you truly desire.